So a lot of the information that we're giving to you today was provided to us by Cullinane Consulting. So we just wanted to give a shout out to them and say thank you for their help in coming up with this material for us. Thanks. So the first learning objective for this presentation is to learn how to identify a competency-based interview question. Then we're going to look at how to answer a competency-based interview question. And finally, we're going to look at using the Carl technique on how to answer competency-based interview questions. So the first question we have to answer is, what are competency-based interview questions? Well, competency-based interview questions, they can also be referred to as situational behavioral questions, are essentially a style of interviewing often used to evaluate a candidate's key competencies. And these competencies might be around things like communication or teamwork. And you'll find that they're very common in interviews now. So an example of a competency-based interview question might be around problem solving. So you might be asked a question such as, describe a time where you solved a problem. Or you might have another question around teamwork, such as, tell me about a time you led or worked as part of a team. And then there's decision making. So you might get a question along the lines of, give us an example of a time where you had to make a difficult decision. So this list here isn't exhaustive. These are just 3 examples of the types of questions you might be asked. You'll find that you may find questions along the lines of, tell us about a time you had to, use your communication skills to solve a problem. Or you might be asked specific questions about the job spec itself. So it might be along the lines of like, tell us around a time where you had to use Excel or data or some data analysis tool or something else to solve a problem. So they might make it specific to the job spec itself as well. Now I want you to think about this competency-based question. So describe a situation where you solved a problem. I want you to think yourself about how would you answer this particular question. So pause the video now and just have a think about how you'd answer this. So if you don't have much experience of answering competency-based interview questions, I'm sure that last question that we asked you might have been a bit tricky to come up with an answer for. And these can be difficult to come up with answers for sometimes. Now, some people can be brilliant. They can come up with great answers. And if you did, well done. But if you didn't, that's okay as well. What we're going to do now is we're going to look at a framework essentially for answering these particular questions. So we're going to look at a framework called the Carl framework. So this stands for context, action, results, and learning. And we're going to show you how you can use this framework to answer competency-based interview questions. So let's look at context here. The first thing you want to do with context is you want to set the scene for the employer. So in this scenario, you want to be very clear. So if they ask you a question around communication and a time you displayed communication skills, you might say something along the lines of, when I was working as a sales assistant at a supermarket, and then give the supermarket's name in that regard. The next thing you want to do is describe what the situation was. So if you're working in a supermarket and it was around communication skills, let's just say you had an irate customer who was annoyed about something. So you could say something along the lines of, there was a customer who was annoyed about being overcharged for a product. And then you describe what you had to do in that regard. So in this scenario with the irate customer, you might say, I had to calm down the customer, and I had to make sure that when they left the shop happy. So to follow on from the previous example of the irate customer, you want to describe the actions you took. And you want to do this with a couple of bullet points almost. So you want to say something on the lines of, well, I listened to the customer. I made sure that they were refunded and charged the correct amount for the product. And I made sure that the customer, the next time they came in, they had a 10% discount on their next shop. So it's really important in this scenario, because you're talking about your own competencies, to focus on the steps that you took yourself. You don't want to say, my manager did this or my coworker did that. They're not interested in those people in the interview setting. They're interested in what you can bring to the role. So they want to know what steps you took in that regard. It's really important as well to look at the steps that you took and use the word I. Don't say we. Now, when we're working in when we're working in teams, we have a natural tendency to say we because we're working as a unit. But it's really important. If you don't say I, if you say we, the interviewer might query how much of the work you actually did yourself. So it's really important to say I in that scenario. Now, it's really important to note that what the results were for the actions you took. So to go back to the customer example again, you could say that as a result of me taking the previous actions of giving him 10% off and listening to him, it resulted in the customer leaving very happy, and very happy the problem's been addressed. And that customer has continued to shop with us over the last 2 or 3 years as our main store because we gave that customer focused attention to him and we fixed his problem for him. A bonus tip as well is that if you can put a number on this, or you can make the result quantifiable. So for example, we saved €10,000 over the year as a result of a particular action. That's really, really good, and it really hammers home the effectiveness of your particular answer. So if you can put a figure on it, that would be super. And finally, the L for Carl stands for learning. So in relation to learning, you want to say what you learned as a result of the actions you took, and as a result of the procedure itself. So it could be around learning a new technology, a better system, or learning a better leadership style. So here we have a few examples of competency-based interview questions that you can use. And we also have a companion sheet that you can use as well. You can find this down below the video, or if this video is being sent out to you via email, we can also send this along in conjunction with the video. And this is just a sheet that you can print off and use yourself that helps you formulate your own Carl answers essentially. So we have a couple of questions here. So we have describe a situation where you solved a problem. Tell me about a time you led or worked in a team. Give an example of a time where you made a difficult decision, or describe a time you had to display excellent communication skills. And on the right here, we have this sheet that you can print out and you can use to answer these particular questions. While you're coming up with these particular steps, it's really great to write them down and to get them there, but it's also really important to practice saying them out loud. So if you can say it to someone in your household, or if there's no one in your household, if you live alone, practice saying it in front of a mirror or something like that can really help enforce this learning. Because there's nothing worse than getting to the stage where you have all these brilliant Carl stories that you can use in an interview, and yet you haven't practiced saying them out loud yet. And because you haven't practiced saying them out loud yet, the first time you say them is in the interview, and they might not come out exactly how you want them to. So if you can practice saying them out loud, that makes a big difference before the interview.